There's something hauntingly beautiful about standing in the shadow of an ancient monument, running your fingers over weathered stone carved by hands long gone. These structures aren't just relics of the past, they're guardians of secrets, their very designs crafted to outwit those who sought to plunder them. For centuries, the architects of these marvels didn't just build for beauty or grandeur. They embedded layers of deception, riddles, and traps into every corner, turning stone and mortar into silent sentinels. And today, we're peeling back those layers to uncover 24 of the most ingenious hidden defenses ever conceived. Picture this: a treasure hunter, armed with maps and greed, steps into a tomb or temple, convinced they've cracked its code. But the walls themselves are watching, a seemingly innocent pattern in the tiles, a cipher leading to a dead end, a hallway that appears to stretch forward. A clever illusion masking a hidden chamber. These monuments weren't just built to impress, they were designed to outthink, to outlast, to protect what was sacred. And the brilliance of these riddles isn't just in their complexity, but in their simplicity. A shifted stone, a misaligned symbol, a path that loops back on itself. Each detail a deliberate puzzle meant to baffle and deter. What's truly astonishing is how these ancient architects anticipated human nature. They knew greed would drive raiders to overlook the obvious, to miss the clues hidden in plain sight. And so they played with perception, turning their monuments into mazes of the mind. From the pyramids of Egypt to the temples of Cambodia, these structures have stood for centuries, not just because of their strength, but because of their cunning. So join us as we step into the minds of these master builders, decoding the riddles that have outsmarted thieves for generations. This isn't just a journey through history, it's a testament to human ingenuity, a celebration of the eternal game between those who build and those who seek to destroy. The monuments have kept their secrets long enough. It's time to uncover them, to understand why ancient builders wove such intricate riddles into their monuments. We have to step into their world, a world where treasure wasn't just wealth, but power, legacy, even divinity. Gold and jewels were only part of the prize. These structures safeguarded something far more precious: knowledge, sacred texts, ritual objects, the secrets of the afterlife. These were treasures that could unravel empires or elevate them. And so the architects didn't just lock them away, they turned the act of reaching them into a test. Think of it like a ceremonial gate where only those with the right wisdom could pass. The riddles weren't just barriers, they were filters, separating the reckless plunderer from the enlightened seeker. Take the pyramids of Egypt, for instance. Their labyrinthine passageways and false chambers weren't just meant to confuse tomb raiders. They mirrored the journey of the soul through the underworld, a spiritual maze where only those who understood the sacred texts could navigate safely. Stumble into the wrong corridor, and you'd find yourself trapped in darkness, a literal dead end. But for the priests and initiates who knew the symbols, the walls themselves whispered directions. This duality, physical obstacle and spiritual trial, made these monuments untouchable to all but a select few. And then there's the psychological genius behind these designs. Ancient builders knew human nature like playwrights crafting a tragedy. A thief, driven by greed, would rush forward, ignoring patterns, dismissing subtle clues in their hunger for quick riches. But the riddles forced patience, demanded observation. A shifted stone here, a hieroglyph out of place there. These weren't mistakes. They were breadcrumbs, leading the worthy deeper while sending the unworthy in circles. Even the act of deciphering became a form of reverence, ensuring that those who reached the treasure understood its true value. The brilliance, many of these riddles didn't just rely on secrecy, they exploited arrogance. Raiders assumed they were smarter than the ancients, that brute force could crack any code. But the architects anticipated this. In Cambodia's Angkor Wat, for example, staircases were intentionally steep, their steps uneven. To climb them, you had to move slowly, deliberately, a physical reminder that haste led to missteps. The temple itself became a teacher, training visitors in humility before they even reached its inner sanctum. What's astonishing is how these strategies still work today. Modern explorers with satellite imaging and ground-penetrating radar still find themselves outwitted by designs carved centuries ago. Because the greatest trick of these monumental riddles wasn't just hiding treasure, it was making the search itself a mirror. Do you rush forward, or do you pause to listen? Do you see only gold, or do you see the story etched into the walls? That's the real lesson these builders left behind. The greatest treasures aren't taken, they're earned. The Great Pyramid of Giza stands as the ultimate testament to ancient deception, a monument where every corridor, every chamber, even the very air you breathe could be part of an elaborate trap. At first glance, its passageway seems straightforward, but that's the genius of it. The builders didn't just rely on brute strength to protect Pharaoh Khufu's treasures, they weaponized psychology. Take the so-called air shafts, narrow channels long assumed to ventilate the pyramid. Modern scans reveal something far more cunning. Some lead nowhere, while others connect to hidden chambers or drop abruptly into pits. These weren't just architectural features, they were decoys, bait for thieves who'd waste precious time squeezing into passages that dead ended in darkness. Then there's the Queen's Chamber, a room that seems conspicuously empty. For centuries, raiders dismissed it as a red herring, a placeholder with no real value. But recent discoveries suggest it might have been the ultimate bluff. Hidden niches in the walls, once concealed by perfectly fitted stone, could have held ritual objects or even mechanisms to trigger traps. The chamber's very plainness was a distraction, diverting attention from the real secrets deeper within. And let's not forget the Grand Gallery, that soaring, narrow hallway lined with mysterious slots in the walls. Scholars now believe these slots may have held wooden beams or counterweights, part of a system that could collapse sections of the pyramid behind intruders, sealing them inside forever. What's truly remarkable is how these tricks played on human impatience. Raiders, convinced they were just steps away from gold, would rush past subtle clues, a slightly uneven floor stone that hinted at a pressure plate, or a hieroglyph angled just enough to point toward a hidden lever. Meanwhile, the real treasure lay behind walls so perfectly fitted that even a knife blade couldn't slip between the seams. The pyramid didn't just outbuild its enemies, it outthought them. Even today, with lasers and robotics, we're still uncovering its secrets. In 2016, thermal imaging detected an unexplained void near the Grand Gallery, sparking theories of yet another concealed chamber. After 4,500 years, the pyramid is still winning the game, but the real lesson here isn't just about traps and tricks, it's about respect. The ancient Egyptians didn't just want to protect gold, they were guarding a king's journey to the afterlife. Every false passage, every hidden switch was a test. Those who approached with reverence, who understood the sacred geometry, might find their way. Those who came only to plunder, they'd vanish into the stone, another cautionary tale whispered by the desert winds. The pyramid wasn't just a tomb, it was a teacher, and its first lesson was simple. Some secrets aren't meant to be stolen, they're meant to be earned. High in the mist-shrouded peaks of the Andes, Machu Picchu's stone walls hold a secret that still baffles modern explorers. The Incas didn't just build a city, they engineered a labyrinth of light and shadow. Walk its pathways at dawn, and you'll witness something extraordinary. massive stones that seem to shift before your eyes, their edges blurring as sunlight dances across their surfaces. This wasn't an architectural quirk. It was a deliberate riddle, a psychological weapon against invaders. The genius lies in the precision of the masonry. Each stone was cut at angles so exact that under certain light, the mortarless seams between them appear to vanish, turning solid walls into shimmering illusions. Pathways that seemed clear at noon would dissolve into dead ends by dusk, leaving intruders stranded in a maze of their own confusion. And it wasn't just about disorientation. Some walls were polished to act like mirrors, reflecting sunlight in specific patterns. At precise times of day, these reflections would align with carvings on distant stones, briefly illuminating hidden doorways or triggering mechanisms. Miss that narrow window and the secret would vanish like smoke. What's even more remarkable is how the Incas weaponized nature itself. They positioned entire buildings to harness the solstices, using the sun's movement as both clock and key. A shadow creeping across a particular step might signal the only safe moment to enter a sacred space. Step too early or too late, and you'd find yourself facing a sheer drop or a collapsed tunnel. Modern researchers have even discovered that certain staircases, when viewed from just the right angle, form optical illusions that make them appear unclimbable, a clever deterrent for anyone not initiated in the city's secrets. But perhaps the most chilling detail, some of these tricks still work today. Even with GPS and 3D mapping, archaeologists have watched in awe as perfectly rational paths suddenly seem to bend or fork under shifting light. The Incas understood something profound. The human mind trusts its eyes above all else. By hijacking that trust, they turned their city into a puzzle that outlasted empires. Their riddles weren't carved in stone, they were woven into the very fabric of perception. And that's what makes Machu Picchu not just a marvel of engineering, but a masterpiece of psychological warfare. Step into the nave of Chartres Cathedral, and you'll feel the weight of centuries pressing down from those soaring Gothic arches. But lean closer to the cold stone walls, and you might hear something extraordinary, a whisper traveling impossibly far, as if the very building is speaking to you. This isn't magic, it's mathematics carved into stone. Medieval architects didn't just build these cathedrals to touch the heavens, they engineered them to control sound itself, turning vaulted ceilings into acoustic riddles that still baffle scientists today. The secret lies in the curves. Every arch, every rib of the ceiling was calculated to bend sound waves in precise ways. Stand in one spot, and a murmur from 50 feet away rings clear as a bell. Take 2 steps left, and that same voice dissolves into gibberish. These whispering galleries weren't just architectural marvels, they were tools of secrecy. Imagine a priest conveying sensitive information during the chaos of a crowded mass. To the untrained ear, his words would be lost in the echo, but an initiate standing in the right alcove would catch every syllable as if the message were meant for them alone. But the real genius, some of these sound distortions weren't just passive, they were traps. Certain pillars were positioned to create dead zones, pockets where speech became unintelligible. A spy leaning against the wrong column would hear only muffled fragments, while the true conversation carried clearly to allies elsewhere. Even the cathedral's famous labyrinth, inlaid in the floor, may have served a dual purpose. Walk its path while whispering, and the winding turns act like a natural amplifier, projecting your voice toward hidden chambers above. And then there's the chilling possibility of sonic misdirection. Scholars now believe some alcoves were designed to create auditory illusions, making footsteps seem to come from the opposite direction, or causing a pursuer's voice to echo from empty air. It's no wonder medieval legends spoke of cathedrals being guarded by invisible choirs. the walls themselves became sentinels, using physics to outwit anyone who dared eavesdrop. What's truly humbling is how these techniques predate modern acoustics by centuries. Without computers or microphones, medieval builders mapped sound waves using strings and weighted plumb lines, tuning their stone-like instruments. They understood that the best defense wasn't always a barred door sometimes. It was a whisper in the right ear and silence everywhere else. Even now, with all our technology, we're still unraveling the full scope of their sonic sleight of hand. The cathedrals stand as a reminder: true power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it speaks just softly enough that only the worthy can hear. In the sun-baked temples of India, light doesn't just illuminate, it deceives. At Konark's legendary Sun Temple, architects crafted a defense so elegant it bordered on poetry. Hallways lined with hundreds of hand-polished metal mirrors, each positioned to fracture reality itself. Step inside unprepared, and suddenly you're surrounded by infinite versions of yourself, your own panicked reflection staring back from every angle. This wasn't mere decoration, it was a psychological gauntlet, turning the very act of walking forward into a test of mental fortitude. The mirrors weren't randomly placed. Ancient builders arranged them in precise geometric patterns, creating corridors where every turn led to another hall of illusions. Some paths looped back on themselves, while others narrowed into dead ends disguised by cascading reflections. Raiders would find themselves chasing glimpses of gold that were just tricks of the light, their own greed turned against them. But the true genius lay in how these mirrors interacted with the sun. At specific hours, when sunlight struck at just the right angle, certain mirrors would project hidden symbols onto distant walls, a fleeting constellation of sacred geometry, visible only to those who knew where and when to look. Archaeologists have discovered that some of these projected images formed maps, revealing the true path through the temple's labyrinth. Others displayed warnings in ancient script, visible only for minutes each day before dissolving back into the stone. The effect was uncanny, as if the temple itself was speaking through beams of light, sharing its secrets only with the worthy. Even the temple's famous chariot wheels weren't just artistic marvels. Their spokes were calibrated to cast shadow patterns that aligned with hidden doorways during solstices, turning the entire structure into a colossal sundial hiding its own blueprints in plain sight. What's most striking is how these mirror mazes exploited human instinct. When faced with endless reflections, the natural urge is to move faster to find solid ground. But haste was the trap. The only way through was slow, deliberate observation, noticing which reflections held subtle distortions, which angles revealed hidden markers. The builders didn't just protect their treasures with stone, they guarded them with physics and psychology, creating puzzles that couldn't be cracked by force, only by patience and reverence. Even today, with laser pointers and digital mapping, researchers still find new layers to these light puzzles. Some mirrors, when struck at the perfect angle, project images that lead to previously undiscovered chambers. The temple's riddles are still unfolding, one beam of light at a time, and perhaps that's the most humbling lesson of all. These weren't just barriers to keep people out. They were invitations to look deeper, to understand that true discovery requires more than just breaking down doors. Sometimes the greatest treasures reveal themselves only to those willing to stand still long enough to see the light dance. Beneath the towering ziggurats of Mesopotamia, where the air hummed with the scent of incense and burnt offerings, the ancient architects wove a deadly dance into the very floors. These stepped temples, reaching toward the heavens, held more than just sacred altars. They concealed a network of weight-activated traps so precise, they turned greed into a death sentence. Picture a raider creeping up the temple stairs, convinced the god's treasures lay just beyond the next terrace. but the moment their foot pressed too heavily on a seemingly ordinary stone, the entire staircase might pivot beneath them, redirecting them into a lightless pit or sealing them behind walls that groaned shut like the jaws of a beast. The brilliance of these traps lay in their simplicity. No complex machinery, no visible triggers, just perfectly balanced slabs of stone calibrated to respond only to human weight. Some tiles were designed to give way only after multiple steps, lulling intruders into false security before dropping them into chambers lined with false exits. Others concealed bridges that would retract the moment someone crossed, stranding them mid-air with no way forward or back. And perhaps most chilling of all were the echo steps, tiles that didn't trigger immediately but instead recorded the intruder's path, collapsing only once they'd ventured too deep to retreat. But these weren't just crude pitfalls. The Mesopotamians engineered their traps with psychological precision. Certain pathways were deliberately uneven, forcing raiders to step unevenly and onto pressure plates hidden beneath the wider treads. Others used optical illusions, with shadows painted along stair edges to disguise the true safe path. Even the sound of footsteps became a weapon. Some chambers amplified noise, so the mere act of walking too heavily could dislodge ceiling blocks or release cascades of sand to bury trespassers alive. What's truly remarkable is how these designs exploited human nature. A thief racing toward treasure wouldn't notice the slight dip in a stone or the faint scrape of counterweights shifting overhead. But a priest moving with ritual slowness would glide safely across the same path, their measured steps avoiding every trigger. The ziggurats didn't just defend their treasures, they demanded reverence. And for those who failed that test, the stones themselves became judges, their silent mechanisms delivering a verdict as old as civilization. Some thresholds aren't meant to be crossed in haste. Modern archaeologists have found evidence of these traps still functional after millennia, their stone counterweights preserved by the dried desert air. In one ziggurat at researchers discovered a pit filled with shattered pottery, not from collapse but from careful placement. The shards were likely arranged to mimic the sound of solid ground, luring intruders into stepping where the floor couldn't hold them. It's a reminder that these builders didn't just rely on engineering. They composed entire symphonies of deception, where every crunch of gravel, every shadow, every uneven breath could be part of the trap. And that's the enduring genius of these riddles in stone. They didn't just outmuscle intruders, they outplayed them, turning human impatience into the very mechanism of their undoing. The ziggurats stand as monuments to a profound truth. The best defenses aren't just strong, they're patient, they wait, and when the moment is right, they let gravity do the rest. Standing among the towering sarsen stones of Stonehenge at dawn, you can almost feel the earth holding its breath. Then, as the first sliver of sunlight breaches the horizon, something extraordinary happens. Shadows stretch like long fingers across the grass, converging on spots that would otherwise seem unremarkable. This isn't just a pretty sunrise, it's a celestial cipher carved into the landscape by ancient hands who understood the heavens better than we often credit. While scholars still debate whether Stonehenge was a temple, a burial ground, or something else entirely, one thing's certain: its builders embedded a sophisticated astronomical code into every stone, turning the entire site into a vault that only the sky could unlock. The key lies in the precision of the alignments. The giant heel stone, for instance, doesn't just mark the summer solstice sunrise. It creates a shadow that bisects the circle at a perfect angle, pointing toward spots where ground-penetrating radar has revealed unusual subterranean voids. During the winter solstice, the opposite occurs. Sunset shadows spear through narrow gaps in the trilithons, intersecting at precise coordinates. These aren't accidents. They're celestial signposts visible only to those who knew exactly when and where to look. Imagine a raider stumbling upon Stonehenge at random, digging frantically between the stones. Unless they struck on one of those fleeting astronomical moments, they'd find nothing but dirt. The treasure, if it exists, remains hidden in plain sight, guarded by the implacable rhythm of the cosmos. But the real marvel is how these alignments double as a calendar and a trap. Certain stones are positioned to cast misleading shadows during ordinary days, creating false targets that would send treasure hunters on wild chases. Only during eclipses or rare lunar events do the true markers reveal themselves, when specific stones glow under moonlight or cast overlapping shadows that form a symbolic X on the ground. Archaeologists have even discovered that some of the smaller blue stones emit faint acoustic echoes during these alignments, as if the site itself hums to life when the heavens are in harmony. What's most haunting is the implication. The builders didn't just want to hide their secrets, they wanted them found, but only by those who'd taken the time to learn their language of light and shadow. In an age before written records, they encoded their knowledge into the very bones of the earth, trusting that future generations worthy of the wisdom would decipher it. Today, as astronomers and archaeologists collaborate to map Stonehenge's hidden geometries, we're beginning to understand the depth of that trust. The stones weren't just silent sentinels. They were teachers, their lessons written in the slow dance of the stars, a dance that continues to unfold, one celestial event at a time. Deep in the jungles of Mesoamerica, where vines snake across weathered stone, the Mayan stelae stand like silent storytellers. At first glance, these towering monuments appear to wear their histories openly, glyphs carved with meticulous precision, recounting the deeds of kings and the movements of stars. But tilt your head when the rains come and you'll witness something extraordinary. Those same glyphs begin to shimmer, their grooves filling with water, revealing hidden lines that weren't there moments before. This wasn't just artistry, it was an ancient security system where the key to unlocking secrets wasn't carved in stone, but written in something far more fleeting: liquid. The trick lay in the depth and angle of the carvings. Certain glyphs were etched with shallow channels that only became visible when liquid pooled inside them, like invisible ink rising to the surface. Some stelae even had grooves so subtle they'd only catch light or liquid at specific times of day. Imagine a raider brushing their fingers over dry stone, convinced they'd seen every symbol. Then a storm rolls in, and suddenly new warnings emerge, curses promising misfortune to those who disturb the monument, or cryptic directions to hidden chambers. By the time the water evaporated, the message would vanish again, leaving no trace for those who didn't know where to look. But the real brilliance was how these liquid clues played with time. Some stelae were positioned to channel rainwater in precise patterns, filling certain grooves first to reveal a sequence, a step-by-step guide visible only during the downpour. Others used sacrificial liquids like blood or ceremonial oils, which clung to the stone differently, unveiling layers of meaning depending on what fluid was used. A priest might anoint the stone with one liquid to see a map, another to reveal a prayer. To the uninitiated, it was just a wet rock. To those in the know, it was a living manuscript. Archaeologists have discovered that some of these hidden glyphs weren't just warnings, they were tests. A stela at Capon, for example, bears a visible inscription about a king's birth. But when drenched, new glyphs appear, instructing the reader to press specific stones in the surrounding plaza. Get it right, and you'd find a concealed offering. Get it wrong, and the path led to a dead end or a trap. The Mayans didn't just hide their secrets, they made them interactive, rewarding patience and ritual knowledge while confounding the impatient. What's most poetic is how these messages mirrored Mayan cosmology. Water wasn't just a tool, it was sacred, a bridge between worlds. By tying their riddles to the rains, the Maya ensured their monuments spoke only when the heavens willed it. Even now, during Yucatan's seasonal storms, researchers rush to document these fleeting revelations, watching as centuries-old warnings and invitations bloom like ephemeral flowers on the stone. The stelae remind us some truths aren't meant to be carved in permanence. They're whispered just once to those who know how to listen. The rose-red walls of Petra's treasury don't just glow in the desert sun, they sing. Stand in the right spot, clap your hands once, and the entire facade comes alive with echoes that ripple like sonar through hidden chambers beneath your feet. This isn't just an acoustic quirk, it's an ancient security system carved into the rock itself, where sound becomes a map and every reverberation holds a clue. The Nabateans, master stonemasons who carved Petra from the cliffs, didn't just build for beauty, they engineered a labyrinth where the walls themselves whispered directions to those who knew how to listen. At first glance, the treasury's ornate facade seems designed to dazzle, its columns and pediments a testament to artistic skill. But lean closer and you'll notice something peculiar. The curves of its alcoves and the angles of its niches aren't random. They're precision tuned to manipulate sound waves, creating echoes that change depending on where you stand. Clap near the central urn and the echo bounces back crisp and clear. Move 3 steps left and the same clap fractures into a staccato rhythm, revealing hollow spaces behind the stone. Archaeologists discovered that these echoes weren't just accidental. They corresponded exactly to the locations of hidden chambers and tunnels beneath the monument. The real stroke of genius, the Nabateans' weaponized impatience. Raiders, rushing to loot the treasury, would never pause to clap or listen, but priests and initiates moving through ritualized steps would use sound to navigate. Certain echoes acted as warnings. A low, rumbling reverberation might signal a dead-end passage or a collapse risk. Others, sharp and melodic, pointed toward safe routes or concealed doors. Even the famous urn atop the treasury's facade isn't just decorative. Strike it lightly, and its metallic ring resonates at a frequency that causes specific carvings on the walls to vibrate, temporarily exposing seams in the stone that vanish when the sound fades. Modern researchers have mapped these echoes using laser scans and audio software, revealing an astonishing truth. The entire facade functions like a giant musical instrument. Each column, each alcove is tuned to a different note in the echo spectrum. When activated in sequence, say, by a series of claps or chants, these notes form a kind of sonic key, triggering subtle shifts in the rock that align hidden doorways. It's no wonder local legends spoke of Petra's walls, singing open for the worthy. The Nabateans didn't just hide their secrets, they composed them into a melody only the initiated could hear. What's most humbling is how this auditory cipher outsmarted centuries of treasure hunters. Tunnels dug haphazardly into the treasury's base often miss the mark by inches, while the echoes would have guided explorers directly to the heart of the monument. Even today, with ground-penetrating radar, we're still uncovering chambers first hinted at by these ancient sound maps. The lesson is clear. Sometimes the loudest secrets aren't seen, they're heard. And in Petra's case, they've been echoing through the stone for 2,000 years, waiting for someone to listen. Beneath the rolling hills of ancient China, where emperors slept surrounded by armies of terracotta warriors, some tombs held a secret more unsettling than any blade or pitfall, doors that moved by themselves. The architects of Qin Shi Huang's burial complex didn't just rely on physical traps. They harnessed the very forces of nature, embedding lodestones into walls and thresholds to create illusions of supernatural power. Imagine a looter creeping through a darkened corridor, only to watch in horror as a massive stone door groaned open without a single touch. No ropes, no gears, just the invisible pull of magnetism playing tricks on the mind. These living doors weren't just for show. Strategically placed lodestones naturally magnetized chunks of mineral interfered with compasses, turning navigation into chaos. Raiders relying on directional tools would find their needles spinning wildly, as if the tomb itself refused to be mapped, but the real cruelty lay in the floors. Some passageways were paved with magnetic stones, calibrated to yank metal tools from belts or even pull daggers from sheaths mid-step. A thief might reach for their weapon, only to find it pinned to the ceiling or sucked into a hidden alcove, leaving them unarmed against the tomb's other defenses. The psychological impact was devastating. Ancient texts describe would-be robbers fleeing in terror, convinced they'd angered vengeful spirits, and that was exactly the point. The architects knew fear could be deadlier than any blade. By weaponizing the unknown, making stone seem alive, making metal betray its wielder, they turned science into superstition. Even the terracotta warriors may have played a role. Some theories suggest their bronze weapons were deliberately magnetized, creating localized force fields that further disoriented intruders. Modern excavations have revealed the staggering precision of these systems. At one Han Dynasty tomb, archaeologists discovered a corridor where the walls contained alternating strips of lodestone and ordinary rock. Walk through with a compass and the needle would flip erratically, mimicking the sensation of walking in circles. Another site used magnetic tiles to create a path of confusion, where the safe route could only be found by following non-metallic markers, a near-impossible task for looters weighed down with iron picks and shovels. What's most impressive is how these magnetic puzzles doubled as tests of knowledge. Taoist scholars of the time understood lodestone's properties, using them in early compasses for divination. A tomb raider might see sorcery, but an initiate would recognize natural magnetism and know to leave their tools behind. The tombs didn't just defend against theft, they filtered out those who lacked the wisdom to approach respectfully. Even now, as scientists use magnetometers to map these ancient traps, we're left in awe of how seamlessly the emperors fused science and psychology. Their greatest trick wasn't hiding treasure, it was making intruders believe the very earth conspired against them. At the heart of the Yucatan jungle, where the ruins of Chichen Itza pierce the sky, the steps of El Castillo hold a secret that only reveals itself when the earth tilts just so. Twice each year, during the spring and autumn equinoxes, something miraculous occurs. The pyramid's shadow transforms. As the sun dips toward the horizon, triangular patterns of light and dark ripple down the northern staircase, merging with stone serpent heads at the base to create the illusion of a colossal snake slithering from the heavens to the earth. This spectacle wasn't just a display of celestial artistry. It was a meticulously engineered clock, its hands carved from shadows, ticking toward the precise moments when the pyramid's deepest secrets could be unlocked. The precision behind this phenomenon is staggering. Each of El Castillo's 9 terraces was calibrated to catch the sunlight at exact angles, with edges so sharp they split shadows like blades. The serpent's body doesn't just appear, it unfolds in 7 distinct segments, a number sacred to the Maya, each segment corresponding to hidden markers along the staircase. Follow these shadowy clues downward, and they'd lead to nearly invisible seams in the stone, marking the entrances to chambers buried beneath the pyramid. But the window was brutally narrow. The full serpent only materializes for about 30 minutes as the sun crosses the horizon. Arrive too early or too late, and the shadows would scatter into meaningless shapes, leaving the doors to the underworld firmly sealed. But here's where the Aztec architects outsmarted even the most determined intruders. The Serpent wasn't just a signpost, it was a decoy. While raiders focused on the dazzling display, the true mechanism lay in what the shadows concealed. Researchers using thermal imaging discovered that certain steps, when struck by the equinox light at precise angles, would heat up faster than others, triggering hidden counterweights inside the pyramid. These weights, made of carefully balanced stone, would shift to open passages beneath the serpent heads, granting access to tunnels that twisted deep underground. The catch: the doors only stayed open as long as the shadow serpent remained intact. Once the light faded, the counterweights reset, sealing the passages with a silence that could last another 6 months. The psychological mastery is just as impressive. The spectacle of the descending serpent was so mesmerizing that few would think to look for subtler clues, like the way specific steps hummed when trod upon during the alignment, or how certain carvings only reflected light onto hidden switches when viewed from one exact spot. The pyramid didn't just hide its treasures, it demanded worship. To reach them, you had to understand the sacred dance of light and time, to see the pyramid not as a static monument, but as a living, breathing entity that spoke in shadows. Even today, archaeologists are uncovering new layers to this solar cipher. In 2021, scans revealed that the shadow serpent's path aligns perfectly with an underwater river beneath the pyramid, a river the Maya associated with the afterlife. It's a chilling reminder that El Castillo's greatest secret might not be gold or jewels, but knowledge, a map to realms beyond the visible, written in a language of light that only the patient and reverent could ever hope to read. In the shadowy depths of Byzantine crypts, where the air hangs thick with the scent of damp earth and old stone, some walls had a habit of disappearing. Imagine a raider, torch flickering against frescoed bricks, pressing forward with greedy determination. Their fingers brush what seems like an ordinary stone in the wall, just slightly warmer than the others, perhaps, or set a fraction deeper. Then, with a groan that echoes like a tomb's last sigh, the entire corridor begins to pivot, sealing them inside a chamber that wasn't there moments before. This wasn't magic, it was mechanics perfected over centuries, a revolving labyrinth where the walls themselves became Judas, betraying intruders with silent, deadly precision. The secret lay in counterweights hidden deep within the crypt's foundations. Each rotating wall was balanced on a central pivot, held in place by ropes woven from horsehair, strong enough to resist casual pressure, but yielding to the deliberate push against specific keystones. Once triggered, the wall would swing smoothly, its momentum driven by carefully calibrated weights that sent it spinning just fast enough to cut off escape. But the real cruelty was in the reset. Over hours or days, as sand trickled through hidden hourglasses or water-filled counterweighted buckets, the mechanism would right itself, leaving no trace of the trap. A second wave of raiders, seeing no evidence of their predecessor's fate, would march blindly into the same rotating prison, adding their bones to the crypt's grim collection. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of these ingenious systems in Cappadocia's underground cities, where some walls still pivot on their ancient axes. The triggers were often disguised as decorative elements, a cross carved into a brick, or a saint's face with eyes just deep enough to depress a hidden lever. Some tombs took the deception further, using the crypt's own acoustics against intruders. Certain notes sung or chanted in the chamber would vibrate specific bricks, causing them to dislodge and release the mechanism. A raider's own voice could become the key to their entombment. What's most chilling is how these traps exploited human psychology. The Byzantines knew that greed made men predictable. A thief, spotting a glint of gold in the next chamber, would rush forward without testing the walls, and so they designed their crypts like hourglasses, each rotation buying time for the trap to reset, ensuring the next desperate soul would meet the same end. Even the frescoes played a role. Some depicted false burial scenes or misleading maps, luring intruders toward the very walls meant to swallow them. Modern researchers using ground-penetrating radar have found evidence of these revolving chambers still functional after a millennium, their counterweights preserved by the dry Anatolian air. In one crypt, they discovered a macabre tally, notches carved into a hidden beam, likely counting the number of times the wall had rotated. The message was clear: these weren't just defenses. They were judges, their silent mechanisms delivering a verdict as old as empire itself, that some treasures are cursed not by magic, but by the weight of human folly. The crypts didn't just outbuild their enemies, they outlasted them, turning each failed raid into another layer of warning for the next. High atop the terraced hillsides of ancient Greece, where actors once breathed life into tragedies under the open sky, the stone seats of Epidaurus held a secret symphony. Run your fingers along their weathered edges today, and you might still feel the faint grooves not from erosion, but from careful tuning. Each bench was precisely shaped to resonate at a specific pitch when struck, transforming the entire theater into a colossal musical instrument. This wasn't just an acoustic marvel, it was a security system disguised as art, where harmony became the key to hidden chambers beneath the stage. The system relied on a principle so elegant it bordered on divine. Only those who understood music could navigate it. Certain seats, when tapped with a mallet or even the heel of a sandal, would produce clear, sustained notes, Doric scales etched into stone. Strike them in the correct sequence, say a rising progression of 5 tones, and the vibrations would travel through hidden channels in the bedrock, aligning harmonic resonators beneath the orchestra. When the final note rang true, a concealed door would groan open, revealing passages used by priests to store sacred texts or ceremonial objects, but play the wrong melody. The stones would swallow the sound, leaving intruders staring at unyielding walls. Archaeologists discovered that the precision of this system was staggering. The musical seats weren't randomly placed, they formed geometric patterns corresponding to the golden ratio, ensuring their notes would harmonize rather than clash. Some were subtly marked with tiny carvings of lyres or flutes, clues for initiates. Others reacted only to specific materials. A wooden mallet might unlock one door, while a bronze striker revealed another. The theater didn't just demand knowledge of music, it required an understanding of its sacred geometry, turning every performance into a potential audition for its secrets. But the real genius lay in how these harmonic keys played with perception. To the untrained ear, the notes sounded like incidental echoes, the natural music of stone. Even if a raider stumbled upon the trick without knowing the correct interval sequence, often based on hymns to Apollo or Dionysus, they'd trigger nothing. Meanwhile, priests could pass freely, their footsteps during rituals tapping out subconscious melodies that kept the doors obedient. Modern experiments have proven how effective this was. When researchers attempted to force open one such door in Delphi, it resisted hydraulic tools. Yet when a musician played the ancient hymn the seats were tuned to, the mechanism released with a sigh, as if greeting an old friend. What's most poetic is how this system mirrored Greek philosophy itself. To them, music wasn't just entertainment, it was mathematics made audible, a bridge between mortal and divine. By weaving it into their architecture, they ensured that only those who respected that bridge could cross it. Even now, as archaeologists use spectral analysis to map the seats' resonant frequencies, we're left humbled by the depth of their thinking. The stones didn't just guard treasures, they sang the virtues of patience, knowledge, and reverence. And in their silent chorus, they issued a challenge that still echoes. If you wish to enter, first learn to listen. Beneath the marble facades of Rome's grandest mausoleums, where ashes of emperors and nobles rested in gilded urns, the air itself could turn traitor. Wealthy families didn't just rely on stone or superstition to guard their ancestors' remains, they weaponized the very act of breathing. Step too close to certain doorways, and your lungs might fill with a fine, shimmering dust, harmless at first glance but laced with toxins refined from crushed minerals or rare plants. These weren't just passive traps, they were psychological masterstrokes, blending superstition with ruthless science. The trick lay in the delivery. Architects designed thresholds with subtle inclines or grooves that funneled air currents across powdered poisons, often harmless when undisturbed, but lethal once airborne. Some doorways hid hollow lintels filled with toxic powders that would cascade down when vibrations disturbed them, like a silent avalanche. Others used hinged panels disguised as decorative reliefs, releasing their payload when pressed. The real cruelty: many of these poisons weren't fast-acting. A raider might make it halfway through the tomb before collapsing, their last breaths spent in terrified confusion as their muscles seized or their vision blurred. But the Romans understood that fear could be sharper than any blade. Inscriptions flanking these deadly portals warned of divine curses. May the gods strike down those who disturb this rest. A ruse that made victims attribute their agony to supernatural wrath rather than chemistry. Archaeologists have found chambers where the walls were intentionally stained with acidic residues, mimicking the appearance of scorch marks from vengeful spirits. Even the placement of urns played a role. Some were positioned to create drafts that carried toxins deeper into the tomb, ensuring no corner was safe. Modern forensic analysis has uncovered the chilling precision of these systems. In one mausoleum near the Appian Way, researchers identified traces of powdered cinnabar, a mercury-based mineral that attacks the nervous system, embedded in the mortar around a false door. Another site used ground oleander, a plant so toxic that even inhaling its pollen can induce cardiac arrest. The most insidious designs employed multiple substances that reacted when combined. Harmless powders on opposite sides of a doorway, when stirred together by a trespasser's cloak, would form a lethal cocktail. What's truly remarkable is how these poisoned portals exploited human arrogance. Raiders who scoffed at cursed tablets as mere superstition would dismiss the dust as ordinary decay until it was too late. Meanwhile, grieving relatives paying respectful visits knew to approach from specific angles, avoiding the deadly drafts. The tombs didn't just punish thieves, they tested reverence. Even now, as conservators painstakingly decontaminate these ancient death traps, we're left with a humbling lesson. Sometimes the deadliest secrets aren't hidden in shadows. They're waiting in the light, disguised as nothing more than motes of dust on a sunbeam. Hidden beneath the grassy slopes of Japan's ancient coffin burial mounds lies a riddle that turns emptiness into armor. These massive, keyhole-shaped tombs from the coffin period didn't just rely on size to deter thieves. They weaponized perception itself, at the heart of their deception. Concave bronze mirrors, polished to perfection and positioned at precise angles to warp reality. Imagine a raider, torch in hand, peering into what appears to be a yawning chasm, their own terrified reflection staring back from what seems like an infinite drop. They'd retreat in panic, never realizing their feet were mere inches from the actual burial chamber floor, a shallow depression cleverly disguised as an abyss. The mirrors weren't randomly placed. Ancient craftsmen calibrated their curvature to catch flickering torchlight at specific heights, amplifying the illusion. Some were even embedded in the walls at opposing angles, creating a hall of mirrors effect that made a 6-foot pit look 60 feet deep. The psychological impact was devastating. Tomb robbers, convinced they'd stumbled upon a bottomless death trap, would abandon their search rather than risk a fatal plunge. Meanwhile, priests and mourners knew the secret. Approach from the north side at dawn, when the low-angle sunlight neutralized the mirror's distortion, and the chasm would resolve into a simple recess holding the deceased treasures. Archaeologists have discovered that some coffin took the deception further by adding sound. Hollow chambers beneath the mirrors would amplify footsteps into booming echoes, reinforcing the illusion of depth. Others used strategically placed wind holes to create eerie whistles that sounded like spirits rising from the void. The effect was so convincing that even early modern excavators documented these pits as genuine hazards before realizing the trick. In one mound at Sakai, researchers found a mirror still mounted in its original position. When they recreated the conditions with period-accurate oil lamps, test subjects consistently overestimated the pit's depth by a factor of 10. But the true stroke of genius was how these illusions exploited cultural fears. Japanese folklore teemed with stories of the dead dwelling in deep, inaccessible realms. By making their tombs appear to tap into that supernatural depth, the builders ensured raiders would police themselves, their own superstitions doing the work of any physical barrier. Even now, as laser scans map these chambers with millimeter precision, we're left marveling at how a few pounds of polished bronze could outwit centuries of greed. The coffin didn't just guard their dead, they proved that sometimes the most impenetrable vault is the one that exists only in the mind. High in the arid mountains of ancient Persia, where Zoroastrian temples stood as beacons of sacred fire, the architects devised a defense that harnessed the fury of the sun itself. Embedded within the temple walls, perfectly polished glass lenses waited silently innocuous circles of transparency that transformed into weapons when the sun reached its zenith. At high noon, as solar rays struck at their most intense, these lenses focused light into searing beams capable of igniting fabric or flesh in seconds. The effect was both brutal and brilliant. Intruders who timed their thefts poorly would suddenly find smoke curling from their robes before flames erupted across their bodies, as if divine wrath had descended upon them. The placement of these lenses was no accident. Zoroastrian priests meticulously calculated their angles to create intersecting beams across key thresholds, turning entire corridors into lethal grids of concentrated sunlight. Some were even mounted on rotating bronze frames, allowing them to track the sun's movement like ancient solar panels of death. The psychological terror was as potent as the physical danger. Raiders who witnessed companions bursting into flames without visible cause would flee in panic, convinced they'd angered the fire god Ahura Mazda himself. Meanwhile, worshippers moved safely through timed rituals, their paths choreographed to avoid the deadly convergence of light. Archaeologists studying the ruins of these temples have found evidence of charred remains near certain doorways, their positioning matching the focal points of surviving lens fragments. Some temples took the deception further by embedding mirrors alongside the lenses, creating a disorienting maze of reflected light that obscured the true danger zones. The most sophisticated designs used colored glass to mask the beams. Amber or green lenses made the deadly rays nearly invisible until they struck their target. But the real stroke of genius was how these solar traps exploited cultural reverence. Fire was sacred to Zoroastrians, a pure element not to be defiled. By weaponizing sunlight, the temples ensured that any thief who burned was seen as having been judged by the divine, their punishment serving as a warning to others. Even now, as researchers recreate these lenses using period-accurate glass formulas, the beams they produce can still scorch wood at 20 paces. It's a chilling reminder that some ancient defenses didn't just outsmart intruders. They turned nature itself into an executioner, leaving no doubt that certain lines were never meant to be crossed. Venice's arsenal vaults held more than just gold and gunpowder. They guarded their treasures with the very element that built the city's empire, water. Deep beneath the docks, where the Adriatic's salt-laced fingers crept through stone channels, the Venetians engineered a defense as fluid as the tides themselves. Touch the wrong lever or step on a disguised pressure plate, and within minutes seawater would come roaring through hidden sluices, transforming serene chambers into swirling death traps. But here's the catch: the speed of the flood wasn't random. It was dictated by the moon's pull, meaning only those who could read the tides like a clock stood a chance of escape. The mechanism was deceptively simple in design but brutal in execution. Iron grates embedded in the floor concealed vertical shafts that dropped straight into the lagoon. Normally, these remained sealed by counterweighted doors, but trigger the wrong mechanism, and those doors would swing open, their hinges timed to the tide tables. High tide, the water surged in with the force of a battering ram, filling the chamber in under 3 minutes. Low tide, a slower, insidious riser, just enough to lull intruders into false security before the water reached waist height and the real horror began. The floors weren't flat, they sloped subtly toward drainage points, creating whirlpools that could drag a man under even in shallow water. And with the doors locking automatically upon activation, there was no swimming back the way you came. But the true mastery lay in the psychological torment. The Venetians knew that fear of drowning outpaced even greed. Some vaults featured tide markers, carved lines on the walls showing hourly water levels so trapped raiders could literally watch their fate approach. Others used acoustics to amplify the sound of incoming water, turning distant trickles into thunderous roars. Archaeologists have found remnants of these systems in the arsenal's oldest sections, including rusted tide gauges still marked with lunar phases and pulley fragments from the locking mechanisms. What's chilling is how these traps doubled as tests of loyalty. Venetian admirals and merchants entrusted with the city's secrets were taught tidal patterns as part of their initiation. A legitimate visitor would know, for example, that the northeast vault flooded fastest during a waning moon and could time their entry accordingly, but a thief, they'd be too busy counting coins to notice the dampness seeping into their boots until the water reached their knees and the exit door clicked shut. Even now, when the Sirocco wind blows hard across the lagoon and the tides run high, you can still hear the groan of ancient sluice gates in the arsenal's depths. They whisper a lesson as old as Venice itself: the sea gives, but only to those who understand her rhythms. Cross her, and she'll take everything. Step into the chapel of St. Ignatius in Rome, and your eyes will play tricks on you from the very first glance. The ceiling swirls with what seem like chaotic brushstrokes, figures stretched unnaturally, colors bleeding into impossible shapes. But take 3 precise steps forward, plant your feet on a single worn stone in the floor, and suddenly the chaos resolves into a masterpiece. Angels soar upward in perfect proportion, saints gaze down with piercing clarity, and hidden within their halos and gestures lie clues to treasures long thought lost. This wasn't just artistic genius, it was security by perspective, where the only key was knowing exactly where to stand. The technique, known as anamorphosis, transformed Renaissance chapels into 3-dimensional puzzles. Artists like Andrea Pozzo didn't just paint frescoes, they engineered them, calculating every brushstroke to align only when viewed from a specific point, often marked by a discrete cross or star inlaid in the floor. From any other angle, the images remained garbled, their secrets safely scrambled. Some concealed maps to church vaults, their lines hidden in the folds of a saint's robe or the curve of a cloud. Others encoded messages in the suddenly legible text of a distorted book or scroll, visible only to those who knelt at the correct pew. But the real stroke of brilliance was how these illusions exploited human impatience. A thief scanning the chapel for clues would dismiss the ceiling as abstract decoration, even if they suspected a code without the exact vantage point, sometimes requiring a viewer to stand at a precise height. The image would never resolve. Meanwhile, priests and initiates moved through rituals that naturally positioned them in the right spot, the secrets revealing themselves as part of worship. Archaeologists have discovered that some of these chapels took the deception further. In one Sicilian church, the anamorphic image only sharpens when sunlight strikes a stained glass window at a particular hour, projecting a colored beam that acts like a spotlight on the hidden details. Another in Florence used concave panels to create illusions that shifted with the viewer's movement, making the treasure map appear to unfurl as one walked toward the altar. What's most poetic is how these designs mirrored Renaissance philosophy. To them, perspective wasn't just a technique, it was a metaphor for enlightenment. The distorted ceiling became a test. Would you rush forward, seeing only chaos, or pause to find the one spot where everything made sense? Even today, as conservators use laser scans to decode these optical vaults, we're left with a humbling lesson. Some secrets aren't locked away, they're painted in plain sight, waiting for those willing to see the world from a different angle. Deep in the vaulted halls of medieval castles, where torchlight flickered against cold stone, trespassers sometimes encountered guards who never slept and never blinked. These weren't flesh and blood soldiers, but marvels of gears and cunning, mechanical sentinels poised to spring to life at the slightest misstep. Picture a thief creeping through a silent corridor, only to freeze as the clank of metal echoes ahead. A towering figure steps from the shadows, not a man, but an armored automaton, its hollow visor fixed on the intruder as it raises a sword with eerie, precise motion. This wasn't sorcery, it was engineering centuries ahead of its time, where artistry and mechanics merged to create legends. The secret lay in networks of hidden triggers woven into the castle's bones. Pressure plates beneath floor stones connected to counterweights and pulleys, their tension calibrated to release only under the weight of an unfamiliar stride. Servants and residents knew to avoid certain tiles or walk with a specific rhythm, but an intruder, their frantic steps would unleash the castle's clockwork defenders. Some automata were designed to intimidate, a snarling iron lion that roared via bellows hidden in the walls, or a skeletal jester whose laughter echoed as it pointed toward a pit trap. Others were lethally practical, like the infamous Crimson Gauntlet of Chateau de Caussy, a mechanical arm that swung a mace with enough force to shatter bone, its movements timed to the drip of a water clock. But the real genius was in the illusions these machines created. Many castles cultivated rumors that their guardians were animated by dark magic or demonic pacts. The truth, gears polished to silent smoothness, counterweights disguised as hanging chains, was far more terrifying to medieval minds. A thief might brave human guards, but facing a soulless metal knight that moved without breath. That struck at the deepest superstitions. Archaeologists have uncovered fragments of these systems, rusted gear trains in castle cellars, grooves worn into flagstones by years of mechanical feat. In Prague Castle's archives, sketches detail a clockwork dragon that belched smoke through hidden pipes, its eyes glowing with reflected candlelight. Other designs were subtler, statues that pivoted to block corridors when triggered, or archer automata that loosed blunted bolts, harmless but loud enough to alert real guards. What's most remarkable is how these inventions blurred the line between myth and machinery. Tales of living statues and enchanted armor weren't just fantasies. they were distortions of real technologies lost to time. Even now, as engineers recreate these mechanisms using period-accurate tools, we're left awestruck by their sophistication. The castle's greatest trick wasn't just scaring intruders. It was making them wonder, even for a heartbeat, if magic might be real after all. And in that moment of uncertainty, the clockwork guardians always struck. Amid the wind-scoured fjords and moss-crusted hills of Scandinavia, Viking runestones didn't just mark graves or victories. They hid messages written in a language only blood could translate. Carved with grooves so precise they seemed ordinary under sunlight, these stones concealed their true inscriptions until activated by a macabre key, the smear of animal or human blood. The moment crimson touched the surface, the runes would darken as if awakened, their hidden warnings or directions pulsing into visibility like veins beneath skin. This wasn't mere superstition, it was a psychological gauntlet, forcing anyone seeking the stone's secrets to first prove their resolve by spilling life onto the rock. The science behind this grisly trick was deceptively simple. Rune masters carved certain symbols slightly deeper than others, their grooves angled to catch and pool liquid. When dry, these recesses blended seamlessly with the stone's texture, but add blood with its unique viscosity and iron content, and the runes would absorb it differently than the surrounding rock, turning bold and legible as the fluid settled. Some stones even used porous minerals like hematite, which oxidized upon contact with blood, causing the runes to darken permanently after activation. The message was clear. Once revealed, there was no hiding the trespass, but the real genius lay in how these blood seals exploited cultural taboos. Vikings revered blood as sacred, a conduit of oaths and curses. To defile a runestone this way wasn't just messy, it risked supernatural wrath. Raiders might happily smash or loot, but deliberately coating a stone in blood. That required chilling intent, and so the stones acted as filters. Only those with truly urgent need, exiles seeking sanctuary, warriors tracking hidden troves, would dare the ritual. Even the placement of these stones played tricks. Some stood near sacrificial sites, where spilled blood from rituals might accidentally reveal clues, while others were positioned to catch runoff from battlefields, turning the aftermath of violence into an unintended key. Archaeologists have documented stones where the blood-activated runes contained dire warnings. One in Sweden's upland region bears a curse that only appears when stained, threatening wanderers with a death that lingers like winter frost. Another in Norway hides directions to a buried hoard, but only after smearing the stone with blood from a specific animal, likely known only to the carver's kin. The cruelty of the system was its adaptability. Some runes faded after drying, resetting the puzzle, while others remained visible as a grim receipt of the act. What's most striking is how these stones blurred the line between practical security and spiritual trial. They didn't just guard treasure or knowledge, they tested the seeker's desperation, their willingness to cross a line. Even now, as conservators debate whether to replicate the blood activation process with synthetic substitutes, the rune stones whisper a challenge. Some truths aren't meant for the curious. They're reserved for those willing to stain their hands and souls to read them. At first glance, the staircases of Angkor Wat seem like any other ancient steps worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, their sandstone surfaces glowing gold in the Cambodian sun. But climb them with haste, and you might learn the hard way why these particular stairs have earned the nickname, the floating steps of death. The architects of this sprawling temple complex didn't just build pathways, they engineered psychological traps disguised as ordinary stonework. Each step was precisely calibrated to bear weight only when approached with ritual slowness, their hidden counterweights and pivots turning greed into a deadly liability. The mechanism was devastating in its simplicity. Certain treads were mounted on concealed fulcrums, balanced so delicately that uneven pressure, like the frantic stomping of a looter racing upward, would send the entire block tipping forward like a seesaw. The moment one end dipped, the step's surface would become a slide, dumping the trespasser into a pit or channel below, but move with the measured pace of a pilgrim or priest, placing each foot squarely in the center, and the steps remained solid as bedrock. The difference between safe passage and sudden plummet wasn't strength or skill, it was reverence. What's most chilling is how these steps played with perception. Some were subtly tapered, their edges worn at angles that made them appear perfectly flat when viewed from below, a cruel optical illusion that hid their true instability until it was too late. Others bore faint carvings of lotus blossoms at their centers, not just as decoration but as bullseyes marking the only safe foothold. Archaeologists have found evidence that certain staircases took the deception further by using sound. Hollow chambers beneath the steps would amplify the creak of shifting stone, turning the staircase itself into an alarm system that echoed across the temple complex. But the real stroke of genius was how these floating steps exploited cultural knowledge. The Khmer builders knew that monks and devotees would approach these ascents with hands clasped in prayer, their weight distributed evenly as they climbed in meditative rhythm. Meanwhile, invaders burdened with stolen artifacts or weapons would inevitably favor one foot over another, their imbalance triggering the trap. Even the spacing between steps played a role. Some were intentionally just slightly too far apart for comfortable striding, forcing raiders to lunge awkwardly and lose their center of gravity. Modern engineers studying these staircases have recreated their mechanisms with startling accuracy. Using period-appropriate tools and materials, they've demonstrated how a step set on a pivot point just 2 finger widths off center could hold 200 pounds when loaded properly, but collapse under half that weight if applied unevenly. The effect is so precise that some researchers suspect the builders used water levels or weighted plumb lines to calibrate each step's balance during construction. Yet perhaps the most profound lesson lies in what these steps didn't do. Unlike spiked pits or collapsing ceilings, they didn't kill indiscriminately. They judged, they tested. A thief might survive the initial fall only to find themselves trapped in a drainage channel or beneath a cascade of dislodged sand, alive long enough to reflect on their mistake. The steps weren't just barriers, they were teachers, their silent stones whispering a truth as old as time, that some paths can only be walked by those willing to move through the world with care. And in a civilization that measured spiritual progress in footsteps toward enlightenment, that message ran deeper than any trapdoor. At the heart of Bali's jungle-clad temples, where stone serpents coil around mossy pillars, the air itself holds the key to hidden chambers. Carved high in the temple walls, intricate latticework vents catch the island's capricious breezes, transforming them into haunting melodies as wind dances through bamboo chimes of varying lengths. But these weren't just decorations, they were sonic locks, each sequence of notes a password whispered by nature herself. Step into the inner courtyard during a storm, and you might hear a cascade of tones so precise it seems composed by invisible hands. Get the melody wrong, and the doors remain sealed. But let the wind play the sacred sequence, and stone panels would groan open, revealing passages known only to priests who'd spent lifetimes learning the temple's breath. The precision behind these wind chime codes was staggering. Each bamboo tube was tuned to a specific pitch, its length and thickness calculated to resonate only when the wind blew from certain directions at particular speeds. Some temples arranged their chimes in ascending spirals, so a gust funneled through the vents would trigger a rising scale, say, 5 notes in the pentatonic pattern of ancient Balinese hymns. Others used opposing sets of chimes that created harmonic intervals when activated simultaneously by crosswinds. The effect was a living, breathing cipher. The right combination of humidity, air pressure, and wind direction could turn a summer monsoon into a celestial key. But the real stroke of genius was how these systems exploited human impatience. Raiders might shake the chimes manually, hoping to brute force the sequence, but the temple's architects had anticipated this. Hidden counterweights ensured the doors only responded to sustained, naturally paced melodies, the kind produced by steady ocean winds, not frantic hands. Some chimes were even weighted to mute themselves if struck too forcefully, their clappers retracting like offended sentinels. Meanwhile, priests knew to wait for the singing winds of dawn and dusk, when seasonal breezes aligned with the temple's orientation to play the sacred tones unprompted. Archaeologists studying these temples have discovered that some chime arrays double as calendars. At Bisaki Temple, the winter solstice wind triggers a sequence that not only unlocks the inner sanctum, but also causes a carved sun disk to cast a beam onto a hidden calendar stone. Other sites use monsoon patterns as part of the code. Only the eastward winds of the dry season can produce the correct descending triad to open the treasury vaults. The message was clear. The temples didn't just demand knowledge, they demanded harmony with the land, the seasons, and the invisible rhythms of the air itself. What's most poetic is how these wind songs blurred the line between security and spirituality. To the Balinese, wind isn't just air in motion, it's the breath of the gods. By tying their locks to something as ephemeral as a breeze, they ensured their treasures could only be accessed in moments of divine permission. Even now, as conservators replicate these chime systems using laser measurements and airflow modeling, they're met with eerie precision. A 3-degree shift in vent angle silences the melody. A half-second pause between notes renders it inert. The temples whisper a truth as old as time. Some doors aren't meant to be forced. They open only when the world itself decides to sing. In the hallowed silence of Chartres Cathedral, where sunlight streams through towering stained glass, the rose window above the western entrance holds more than just biblical scenes. Its kaleidoscope of crimson, sapphire, and gold isn't merely decorative, it's a celestial cipher designed to turn sunlight into a security system. On the summer solstice, when the sun reaches its zenith, those jewel-toned panes transform into a living key. Beams of colored light strike specific points on the cathedral floor, their intersecting patterns forming a geometric code known only to medieval master builders. Step into the right sequence of illuminated tiles, and the flagstones beneath your feet would shift with a whisper, revealing a staircase spiraling down to chambers where sacred relics were hidden from pillaging armies. The precision behind these prismatic passwords was breathtaking. Each pane of glass was subtly warped or thickened to refract light at precise angles, creating projections that changed with the sun's movement. Some sections contained hidden markings, a fleur-de-lis with an extra petal, a saint's halo slightly off-center, that only became visible when their colored shadows aligned with carvings on the opposite wall. The effect was fleeting. The full pattern might last only 20 minutes as the sun traversed the window's face. Miss that window, and the code dissolved back into ordinary light. But the real stroke of genius was how these windows exploited human perception. To the average worshipper, the dancing colors were just a beautiful spectacle. But to initiates, certain combinations signaled danger. In Notre Dame, for example, a specific emerald and ruby pattern projected onto the north transept wall indicated that the adjacent relic cabinet had been rigged with a counterweight trap. Touch the cabinet during those minutes, and its contents would tilt backward into a secure vault, leaving thieves grasping at empty air. Other cathedrals used the light to expose nearly invisible seams in the masonry lines that, when traced with a finger, caused entire altar panels to pivot. Modern researchers using spectral analysis have discovered that some rose windows contained covert layers of glass, each filtering light to different frequencies. At certain times of year, these layers would interact to project ultraviolet patterns onto specially treated stones invisible to the naked eye, but glowing conspicuously to anyone who'd rubbed their hands with a plant-based phosphorescent paste used by medieval monks. It was a multi-factor authentication system centuries ahead of its time. To open the most secure compartments, you needed both the solar alignment and the chemical key. What's most poetic is how these luminous codes mirrored medieval theology. Light to Gothic architects wasn't just illumination, it was divine revelation. By making their vaults respond to sunlight's sacred dance, they ensured that only those who understood the interplay of heaven and earth could access their deepest secrets. Even now, as laser scans map these hidden optical pathways, we're left marveling at how a handful of colored glass could outwit centuries of greed. The rose windows didn't just filter light, they filtered intentions, separating those who sought beauty from those who sought to possess it. And in their shimmering depths, they posed a question that still lingers. Is it theft if you never understood what you were stealing in the first place? In the silent depths of Ottoman tombs, where the air hangs thick with the scent of aged stone and forgotten incense, the floors themselves held a chilling secret. They remembered how many feet stepped upon them. These weren't just ordinary stone slabs, they were precision-engineered scales, balanced to tolerate the weight of a single mourner but collapse beneath the greed of a group. Picture a band of raiders, emboldened by numbers, creeping into a sultan's resting place. The moment the second trespasser crossed the threshold, the floor would groan, then give way, plunging them into a pit of jagged limestone or a chamber designed to echo their screams upward as a warning to those who remained. The message was clear: solitude was the only currency accepted here. The mechanics behind these weight-sensitive floors were deceptively simple yet brutally effective. Hidden beneath seemingly solid flagstones, counterweights hung in delicate equilibrium, often sand-filled urns or bronze plates suspended on silk cords. A single person's weight would displace just enough sand or tilt the plate slightly, leaving the system stable, but add a second intruder, and the excess pressure would trigger a cascade. Some tombs used a network of pivoting beams that interlocked like a puzzle. Step in the wrong sequence, and the entire floor became a seesaw, dumping trespassers into darkness. Others employed brittle limestone layers that fractured along predetermined faults when overloaded, ensuring the collapse looked like an accident rather than a trap. But the real psychological mastery lay in the tomb's design. Many featured narrow entryways that forced visitors to enter single file, heightening the illusion of safety. Once inside, the chamber would open into a seemingly spacious vault, encouraging raiders to spread out, unaware that the floor's tolerance was calculated for centralized weight. Some incorporated faint carvings of scales or lone cypress trees, subtle hints that only the solitary would pass unharmed. Even the act of mourning played a role. Genuine visitors would approach the sarcophagus slowly, their weight distributed evenly, while looters would rush toward valuables in a chaotic stampede, their uneven footsteps dooming them. Archaeologists have uncovered remnants of these systems in Edirne's Selamei complex, where fragments of counterweighted tiles still bear grooves from their silk ropes. In one tomb, the pit beneath the false floor contained Ottoman-era coins likely dropped by would-be thieves mid-plunge. But perhaps the most chilling discovery was in Topkapi's lesser-known mausoleums. Some collapsing floors didn't lead to spikes or drowning chambers. They simply sealed shut after the drop, leaving intruders buried alive with the very treasures they sought, their fate a grim echo of the dead they'd come to rob. What's most striking is how these tombs weaponized a fundamental human instinct: safety in numbers. By inverting that logic, the architects forced raiders to confront their own distrust. Could you split the treasure fairly if only one entered? Would your partner outside really wait or vanish with the spoils? The weightless chambers didn't just test bravery, they exposed greed's fractures. Even now, as preservationists reinforce these fragile floors, they tread carefully, one at a time. The stones may be centuries old, but their lesson remains weighty. Some doors demand you leave your allies, your doubts, even your humanity behind before they'll let you through. Imagine navigating a pitch-black jungle at night, where every step could mean plunging into a ravine or disturbing a nest of venomous creatures. Now picture a faint, eerie glow underfoot, a trail of soft blue-green light winding through the darkness like a living constellation. This wasn't fantasy. In the sacred valleys of Polynesia, priests and navigators cultivated bioluminescent algae and fungi, turning nature's chemistry into a divine security system. These glowing pathways didn't just light the way, they judged who was worthy to walk them. The science behind these living lanterns was as precise as it was beautiful. Certain species of algae, like Pyrocystes fusiformis, were carefully nurtured in shallow channels or on specially treated stones, their glow activated by the disturbance of footsteps. The intensity and duration of their light depended on the walker's pace. A slow, reverent stride would produce a steady glow, while frantic steps would cause the organisms to dim or flicker out, leaving the trespasser stranded in darkness. Some paths even used different species with varying luminescence: blue for safe routes, green for areas requiring caution, and red achieved through filtered lenses or mixed organisms to mark forbidden zones. But the true ingenuity lay in how these trails played with perception. Only those trained in the sacred protocols knew which glowing patterns to follow. A spiral of light might signal a hidden turn, while a straight path could dead end at a cliff masked by foliage. Raiders, assuming all light led to treasure, would find themselves lured into swamps or circles of jagged volcanic rock. Meanwhile, initiates recognized subtler cues: the way certain stones pulsed brighter when touched with a ceremonial staff, or how the algae's glow intensified near concealed altars when chants were sung at specific pitches. Archaeologists have discovered that some of these bioluminescent markers were paired with acoustic traps. In the Marquesas Islands, hollow logs positioned beneath glowing stones would amplify the sound of missteps, alerting nearby sentries. Other sites used the algae's sensitivity to temperature. Body heat from lingering too long in one spot could cause the glow to fade, erasing the path behind the trespasser. The message was clear: hesitation was as dangerous as haste. What's most poetic is how these living lights blurred the line between the sacred and the scientific. To Polynesian navigators, bioluminescence wasn't just a tool, it was the breath of the ocean gods, a physical manifestation of mana, or spiritual power. By weaving it into their sacred geography, they ensured that only those in harmony with the land could navigate it. Even now, when scientists replicate these trails using modern bioluminescent cultures, they're struck by the precision of the ancient systems. The algae's glow lasts exactly as long as a ritual procession should take. The dimming intervals match the cadence of traditional chants. These weren't just paths. They were living tests, their glow a language written in light and time. Follow them with reverence and they'd guide you home. Approach with greed and they'd leave you lost in the dark, a warning as old as the stars themselves, flickering softly in the depths of the jungle. The true brilliance of these monumental riddles isn't just in their complexity, it's in their timelessness. Centuries after their creation, they still force us to reckon with a simple question: what does it mean to outsmart someone? The answer lies not in brute strength or impenetrable walls, but in understanding how people think. Ancient architects didn't just build barriers, they built mirrors, reflecting human nature back at us with startling clarity. Greed rushes forward, so they designed labyrinths that rewarded patience. Arrogance overlooks details, so they hid clues in plain sight. Fear hesitates, so they engineered traps that punished doubt. Every riddle was a lesson in psychology long before the word existed. Consider the common thread weaving through these 24 examples. The most effective defenses weren't just physical, they were philosophical. The Mayan stelae that revealed secrets only when bathed in rain taught the value of timing. The Venetian flood chambers tied to lunar cycles underscored the importance of harmony with nature. Even the Viking runestones demanding blood sacrifices weren't just about violence. They tested commitment, forcing intruders to confront whether their desires were worth the price. These monuments didn't just protect gold or relics, they safeguarded ways of thinking, ensuring only those who shared the builder's world could access their treasures. What's truly humbling is how these ancient riddles still outpace modern technology. Today, we rely on encryption and biometric scans, yet how many of our digital vaults could be cracked by someone who simply understands human behavior? The builders of these monuments anticipated not just the tools thieves would use, but the impulses driving them. They knew technology evolves, but human nature remains stubbornly consistent. A medieval cathedral's whispering gallery exploits the same cognitive blind spots as a phishing email. Both rely on the listener's willingness to hear what they want to hear. Perhaps the most profound legacy of these riddles is what they reveal about the societies that created them. A civilization's defenses are a window into its deepest values. The Incas' light-based traps at Machu Picchu reflected their reverence for celestial patterns. The Zoroastrian temple's solar lenses mirrored their worship of fire as divine judgment. Even the Ottoman weight-sensitive tombs, punishing those who came in groups, spoke volumes about a culture that distrusted collective ambition. These weren't arbitrary puzzles, they were cultural manifestos carved in stone. Now, standing before these monuments as modern observers, we're left with a challenge that transcends archaeology. The real treasure isn't the gold or artifacts that might still lie hidden. It's the chance to engage in a conversation across time. Each riddle is an invitation to think like its creators, to shed our assumptions and see the world through their eyes. That's why these defenses endure. They demand more than cleverness. They demand empathy, and in that demand, they remind us that the greatest monuments aren't made of stone or metal, but of ideas so compelling that they've outwitted, outlasted, and outshone centuries of human ambition. As we close this journey through time, remember that these riddles are more than clever tricks. They're a dialogue between past and present. Standing before these monuments, we're not just observers, we're participants in an ancient conversation. Each carved symbol, each hidden mechanism whispers a challenge across the centuries. Look closer, think deeper. The real treasure isn't just what these builders hid, but how they hid it, their understanding of human nature, their mastery of materials, their reverence for the invisible threads connecting earth and sky. Consider this: every undiscovered chamber, every unsolved cipher is an open invitation. The pyramids still guard corridors no modern laser has pierced. The jungles of Cambodia conceal temples whose mirrored halls might still deflect satellites. Even the wind chime locks of Bali wait for the right monsoon to sing their combinations. These aren't dead secrets, they're dormant, patient, trusting that someday someone will approach them with the right blend of curiosity and respect. But here's the most humbling thought: the greatest riddle might still lie ahead. For all our drones and scanners, we've only decoded a fraction of what these monuments contain. What if the real masterpiece isn't any single trap or trick, but the collective genius they represent? A lineage of architects who turned stone into sentinels, light into locks, and sound into swords. Their legacy isn't just in what they protected, but in the questions they force us to ask ourselves. Would we have been worthy of their secrets? Now it's your turn. Have you stood before one of these monuments and felt the weight of their riddles? Maybe you've spotted a detail historians missed, or you've wondered what modern puzzles might baffle future explorers. Drop your thoughts below. This conversation doesn't end here. And if you're hungry for more journeys into the past's enigmas, hit that subscribe button. Because somewhere out there, in the shadow of a forgotten temple or the curve of an unread inscription, the next great mystery is waiting. The only question is, will you be the one